Hi and welcome back. Today our lesson is to talk about introducing others. If you can remember, previously we talked about how you can introduce yourself. So now we want to see how you can introduce others. Take for example, let's say we have Mr. A and Mr. B. So Mr. A does not know Mr. B, and Mr. B does not know Mr. A. So you want Mr. A to know Mr. B and Mr. B to know Mr. A. First, we can say, Mr. A, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. B. Mr. A, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. B. Or Mr. A, please meet Mr. B. Mr. A, please meet Mr. B. Or Mr. A, I'd like you to meet Mr. B. Mr. A, I'd like you to meet Mr. B. Or Mr. A, may I introduce you to Mr. B? Mr. A, may I introduce you to Mr. B? Or if you like, we change the form depending on the person. For example, here we can say, Mr. A, have you met Mr. B? Mr. A, have you met Mr. B? Or Mr. A, this is Mr. B. Mr. B, this is Mr. A. Just you say, Mr. A, this is Mr. B. Mr. B, this is Mr. A. Or if we like, we can remove this is. When we do, the introduction just becomes Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. B, Mr. A. So Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. B, Mr. A. It means Mr. A, this is Mr. B. Mr. B, this is Mr. A. If you take a look at all these expressions, the last three are different from the first ones. The last three, you can use them just for like friends. So you meet just friends, say, this is that, Mr. A, this is Mr. B, Mr. B, this is Mr. A, or Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. B, Mr. A. But the first ones where you have, I'd like to introduce you to, please meet, I'd like you to meet, may I introduce you to, you should use them when you want to sound polite. That is, for example, the person maybe is meeting, let's say for example, your parents or your bosses at workplace, so you don't want to sound friendly. There are so many ways to speak. We have informal speaking and formal. So when you meet parents, the way you talk to them is different from the way you talk to friends and so on. That's it for now. Thanks for watching and listening. Until next time.